Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 89, and we're back with new standard set after a long period of Lord of the Rings. Um, so today we're going to be talking about the Wilds of Eldraine, and since I didn't play it except for the pre-release, it's going to be more looking at the set from the design perspective, looking at frequencies of certain cards and what can that mean to the first days of the format, and what can we maybe try to read from the set spoiler, basically. But before we go into that, I would like to thank my sponsors, and that's obviously mtgazone.com, who I will restart writing articles as the standard set is back. And also thanks to Patreons. And I have two new patrons that I would like to thank, Ganivo and Matthew. So thanks so much for your patronage. Okay, and with that out of the way, we can move to the main topic. But of course, before I do the main topic, I'll start with my preamble. And this one is related to the episode. It's basically, before you get to play with the cards, better to think what is possible rather than what is good. And I think that I applied this kind of rationale to my set reviews. I don't look really at what's going to be strong because it's just impossible to predict. So you might as well admit that you can't predict it. And instead of that, I'm trying to see what is going to be possible without determining if it's going to be good or not. So I'm looking at density of certain types of cards. I'm looking at how does the removal align with the format. I'm looking at how many of particular cards in each color are there. I'm looking at how much support is there for particular archetypes, and generally, is this a set that's going to have those straightforward carved paths by the design, or is it going to be maybe a set where there are like pockets of synergy that you can explore? And in the end, most of the time, what you see in the first weeks, power is going to dominate the format. So in the first few days, we're going to learn which are the most powerful cards. And then later, as the format progresses, usually the synergies are sort of taking back their spot because people learn how to build the decks better and how to exploit those synergies much better than in the first days when they have, there's a certain amount of clunk in their decks because people play cards that shouldn't be in particular synergy pieces. Over time, they figure that out and they start playing only the good cards for the particular archetype. So rather than telling you what is going to be busted in this format, I'm going to try to look at what is possible and what does it mean for how you should be drafting particular decks. So this is my general layout of the mechanics for the set. I actually have to say I did gain a lot in building those beautiful diagrams by collaborating with Jason, who is in the chat, at the Draft Skeletons stream. But basically, there are those four main mechanics: the celebration, rolls, food, and adventure. And there's a bargain mechanic that overarches everything and sort of taps into every single one of those one way or another. Maybe with the exception of celebration, which has very little to do with bargain. That's why I try to put it on this side here. But I think rolls, adventures, and food are all going to be excellent in bargaining because they do provide fodder for those. They do synergize in some ways, and they're intertwined in a way. And bargain allows certain things that would not be possible without the mechanics. So I think it's going to be pretty important to have some bargain cards in your deck, and it's going to be pretty important to have some cards that make bargaining easy. So let's start with the celebration because this is a very separate mechanic from everything in the set. There is 9 cards-ish in red and white that have celebration. And what I notice is that the benefits of the celebrating are relatively small. So that means that most of the time you can play with those cards on their own. I think like Ash Party Crusher, 2 mana, 2/2 haste, arguably slightly difficult to cast and legendary, but 2 mana, 2/2 haste is a good card already on its own. Now, if you celebrate once, that's going to be really strong. Like 3/3 haste is a busted card in limited at least. So just doing it maybe once makes it into a really strong card, but you don't have to go like completely out of your way to celebrate every turn in order for those cards to work. And this, I think, makes it an interesting approach from the design point of view. And I heard Mark Rosewater podcast when he's driving and chatting, and he was chatting with the set designer, and they specifically said that both in terms of the celebration creatures and in terms of adventure creatures, they wanted them to be almost good enough on their raw stats without looking at the celebration part or without looking at the adventure side of it. And I think that's an interesting approach. This means that possibly even if they miss on power level of those adventure spells or power level of those celebration abilities, or how frequently you'll be able to celebrate during your turn, even though they did make sure that there's a lot of cards that on their own trigger the celebration trigger. But even if you miss a bit on those, you still are ending up with decent creatures. Importantly, celebration looks like a mechanic that you get rewarded for doing well. So this is going to be a mechanic, it seems, that is designed for being ahead, which means that you almost exclusively, maybe with like one exception, want to play those cards in a way when you want to be ahead. And also, this is probably going to be a mechanic that if you play a deck like that, you definitely want to be on the play rather than on the draw. But most of the cards are good enough without it. So let's look at some examples. I look at like Gallant Pie Wielder. That's a 3-mana 2/3 first striker, which I think are really good stats for this set. 3 toughness, it's okay. First strike is very annoying in a set that has plenty of rolls flying around. So if you make it a 3/4 first striker, that's going to be a really difficult creature to deal with. And if you manage to trigger celebration and give a double strike, that will basically force your opponents to chump block the creature, and therefore getting you ahead on board. And if you're getting ahead on board, that means that all your other celebration cards become slightly better because you want to be ahead. And if you force your opponent to chump, you obviously are getting ahead. So looks like a solid creature on its own. And if you trigger celebration, it's just pretty good. Look at the Godric Cloak Reveler. That's a 3-mana haste 3/3. That's usually good enough to be played in limited as a sort of like a C+B- level card. And it has celebration as long as 2 non-land permanents enter the battlefield. It turns into a 4/4 flying. Is it flying even? Huh. It's a dragon with the power top. No, flying. Yeah, okay, it is flying. It's a 4/4 flying fire-breathing dragon. Obviously, you won't be probably able to fire-breathe a lot because you had to at least put 2 permanents onto the battlefield, so you must have tapped out quite a lot. But even if you have like 1 mana left over, it can swing for 5. So like a super big upside for a creature that is already like a good C+B- level thing. And obviously it's easy to say that, oh, a rare is a really strong card. So I also gave you an example of the Armory Mice. It's a 2-mana 3/1, and a 2-mana 3/1 is such an important creature in many formats because this is the way. Like if you manage to get one hit with the Armory Mice somehow, you are ahead by life, and that means that your opponent is on the back foot, and that means that you're on the front foot, and that means that you can sort of reap benefits from being ahead. And as I said, it looks like the celebration mechanic and general Boros theme is you want to be ahead all the time. And if you manage to trigger it on turn 3 and get it +0/+2, you most certainly have an attack. So that's like a good upside that will make sure that it will be hard to trade. And again, you get this advantage in life, and because you get advantage in life, you also get upper hand in the game, and you can, you don't have to play on the back foot where your celebration triggers are absolutely useless, because you will very, very, very rarely trigger celebration on your opponent's turn. I think it is possible in some very Magic Christmas Land kind of scenarios. So your creatures are much better on the attack, therefore you want to be on the attack, therefore you want to play those kind of aggressive creatures like Armory Mice are. And there are some cards that really do benefit from that celebration, and you really want to trigger those celebrations. And my example is the Tinevale Guide. That's a 4-mana 2/3 flyer. And 4-mana 2/3 flyer is just not enough in Modern Magic. That card probably is not going to be super strong. I'm still going to probably play it more than most people because I will try to get the Griffin Harry working. As you will notice later, I'm a big fan of trying to make that card work. But of course, 3/3 flying lifelink creature is pretty strong. So if you're capable of reliably triggering Celebration with the Time Veil Guide, that card can become pretty good. And I think that if you play this card, you are maybe not playing that much of an aggressive deck. So you might want to have some kind of repeatable triggers for generating some kind of cardboard on the board. And you want to play like a longer game when you sort of outgrind your opponent with the 3/3 flying lifelinker. Same with the Belligerent of the Ball. It's a 3-mana 3/3. Center Courser is nothing exciting in the modern Magic, which means to me that Belligerent of the Ball is only good when you're reliably triggering that celebration multiple times. When you do, it's good because even on the turn it enters the battlefield, you can give, if you manage to get another permanent on board, you can give another creature +1/+0 and menace until end of turn, so you can enable attacks that otherwise would be not beneficial for you. And yeah, again, this card I really want to be able to trigger that celebration. And the last example of the cards where I really want to trigger celebration is this Grand Ball Guest, 2-mana 2/2. And as far as I'm happy with the 2-mana 3/1, because the 2-mana 3/1 kills in 7 turns, and even if it gets a couple of hits in, that's a large chunk of damage. 2-mana 2/2 does not have that power. It still dies to almost anything, and at the same time doesn't eat opponent's life total as efficiently as a 3/1 does. So in this case, I really do want to trigger that +1/+1 trample clause, and possibly even put some kind of a roll on it at the same time. So you can start attacking with a 4/4. But this, I really want a lot of those 2 cards entering at the same time in my deck in order to play a card like this. Because otherwise, vanilla 2/2, some might disagree, but is severely underrated, under the rate. Okay, so I think that's enough talking about the celebration. Let's look at the roles. And here we go first of those 4 intertwined synergistic mechanics. There are 6 roles, important to know. Monster, that's a +1/+1 and has trample. There are 5 cards that have a monster role on them. And they are mainly in green and to some extent in red, and I think that there is a green-white multicolor card that has it. So sort of Naya mechanic. +1/+1 and has trample, a good bonus, especially when you can put it on something big and dumb that wouldn't otherwise be able to go through. Not many of those creatures, but there are some, so make sure that you do it. Like, I think perfect target for a monster roll is the black 4/5 Death Toucher. Because obviously Death Touch and Trample work exactly as you want them to. So it will become a really fast clock. And also that one makes food when it connects. So like a perfect creature for a monster roll. Then we have a Sorcerer roll. This one, I mean, when you read it, you would think that it's an Izzet mechanic, but it's not. It's actually Azorius mechanic. There are only 4 cards that make it. And basically gives the enchanted creature +1/+1, and when it attacks, scry 1. So basically fixing your draws ever so slightly. Only 4 of those, so they're not going to become super important, and especially that the ones that are on the blue creatures are, to put it mildly, maybe underpowered, I think, at least for now. So I don't know how impactful they're going to be. Mind you, I think that the important part is that Sorcerer roll is the only roll in blue that generates a positive effect on your creature. If you're looking to boosting your blue creatures, you must look for rolls in other color combinations, unless you want to play those sort of middling blue cards that make Sorcerer roll. Then we have the Royal roll, only 4 cards. They are localized in Selesnya. It gives +1/+1 and ward 1, so a sort of protective kind of aura. Makes your creature just a bit more difficult to remove. The 1 extra mana seems like nothing, but actually it does count for something. It will stop your opponent sometimes to double spell. It will not allow them to kill something if they have like a 5-mana removal spell and they only stuck at 5 lands. So it will play it will be imported in some way or another, but only 4 cards have it. So, that's going to be like massively predominant. Then we have the young hero role. This one is a Boros mechanic. So the 5 cards that are there, mainly in red and white, I think only in red and white. And it has whenever this creature attacks, if its toughness is 3 or less, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So this is obviously something that you want to put on an evasive small creature. I identified several of those. I think that really good one is Gingerbrute, because it will eventually grow the Gingerbrute into a 4/4, and obviously Gingerbrute's ability is you can give it sort of unblockability, because not many creatures with haste. I think good ones are blue flyers, especially like 1 mana, 1/1 flyers. You can put the young hero roll on those and also grow them into sort of air elemental. And in red, there is this 2/1 creature that has first strike on your turn. That's also a good target for that role, because you can grow it into a 5/4 first striker, which is pretty. Then we have Wicked, which somehow is the most predominant type of role. There are 10 cards that distribute Wicked roles in the set, and all of them are in Rakdos color combinations. Wicked gives +1/+1, and when this aura is put into graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So basically, your creatures become not only bigger, but also when they die, they also ping the opponent. Or not only if they die, but if you put another roll on the creature with a Wicked roll, and you, by doing so, destroy the Wicked roll, they also will lose life. Because I didn't mention that, but you can only put 1 roll you control on target creature you control. So if you put the second one, the first one drops off instantly before the second one hits the table. So yeah, Wicked, a Rakdos mechanic. And then we have Cursed, and Cursed is a blue mechanic. It only exists as something that you can put on your opponent's creature in blue. That's why blue doesn't have that many of those boosting rolls. It does exist on 2 cards in white and in black, but as a drawback to them when they put it on themselves or on something that you control. And basically, they are very undercosted creature that come with this role, and you need to figure a way of getting rid of it in order to make your creature stronger. So yeah, there we go. What else? I think that this is for the starters. And there are several types of creatures. I think that of ways of putting rolls on your creatures. The first one I want to focus is roll givers. And roll givers are the creatures that can put a roll, but not on themselves, but on something else you control. And this is pretty important, because if you play those creatures, you definitely want to have a lot of cheaper creatures than the thing that you are playing in your deck, because if you don't, you will be frequently forced to play that creature without any value. And if you look at the Red Tooth Genealogist, that's a 3 mana 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, create a royal roll token attached to another target creature you control. If you play it for 3 mana as a 2/3, that type of card is not valid in Magic anymore, not at all. However, if you have a 2/2 on board already and you boost the 2/2, then you basically put a 3/4 of stats for 3 mana, which is actually good. So you have to think about how you build your deck, and this will have implications, because like if you look at the card like Splashy Spellcaster, that's a 3 and a blue for a creature elemental wizard. It's a 2/4 for 4 mana, which is a really bad stat line for that cost. But whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a sorcerer roll token attached to up to one other target creature you control. So it wants you to play instant and sorceries, but at the same time, it wants you to have like loads of creatures, because if you don't attach those rolls onto anything, then what's the point of having a vanilla 2/4? I think that I might be proven wrong, but I think that if you would do alchemy like a couple of months after the set release, you probably would change that it can actually boost itself and make itself into a 3/5 in order to be a card at the uncommon power level. As it is, I think it's going to be a really difficult. It will be a really difficult thing to be able to both have enough spells to trigger it and have enough creatures to find targets for it. So this is like this classic A plus B mechanic, which is tricky to do. Luckily, and that might be the redeeming part of that card. Luckily, there's plenty of adventure creatures in blue and red where you would be expecting to play this kind of spells matters kind of deck. So maybe the fact that you have spells attached to the creatures is half saving it. But the problem with that is, of course, you play the spell before you can cast the adventure creature. So you cast the spell, you don't have a creature on board to put the roll on. Then you cast the creature, but you don't have a spell. So it's like, yeah, it has to line up in the right order. I don't think it's very stealth, secret agent 69. Blue-red, apart from the spells matter, they do have the highest density of adventures. Adventures is basically a team or mechanic in this set. Yeah. Sorcerer role feels weirdly close to the ring, but so much worse. Yeah, so much worse, indeed. It's like Ring at Home. Okay. And you have a card like Besotted Knight, which has a 1-mana sorcery adventure tagged to it that can put a royal roll attached to target creature you control. But of course, because it's an adventure, it cannot target itself. So you need to have another creature to be able to cast the adventure part of the Betroth the Beast. And if you don't have it, well, then you have to play 4-mana 3/3, which is a hill giant, which is just not good enough. I'm, struggling with the idea if that card is good enough at all, because 5 mana for a 4/4 with part of it maybe has a ward 1. I don't think it's like super powerful, but we still didn't play with it. It just looks slightly underpowered. And again, also because it cannot sort of give itself a role. Then there are the role givers that don't need other creatures, and for different reasons. Merry Bards, for example, they are 3-mana 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay 1, and when you do, create a young hero role token attached to target creature you control. Mind you, that target creature can be the Merry Bards, so Merry Bards can enter with this young hero role, so they will attack as a 4/3, and if they manage to push through and survive, then they can attack one more time and become a 5/4, which is not terrible. But at the same time, they can also be played for 4 mana, and they can put a young hero role on something that actually can use the mechanic much better. So like a 1/1 flyer, or as I mentioned before, the Ginger Brute. So this was pretty flexible and doesn't require other creature, which sort of bumps it up. I'm still not thinking it's an amazing card, but it's nice that it has this self-contained synergy with itself, much better than having to have another target for it. Unassuming Sage, that's a 2-mana 2/2, so you can just play it as a defensive creature early in the deck or aggressive creature early in the deck if you don't have a 2-drop. But if you draw it later, you can pay 4 mana, and it enters the battlefield with a sorcerer role attached to itself. So it becomes a 4-mana 3/3 with the sorcerer role, so like slightly better hill giant. But still, it has the flexibility. It can be played as a 2-drop. It can be played as a 4-drop. The scry is not nothing. So later in the game, that that scry counts probably like 0.4 of a card, because you will probably scry the land to the bottom. So 40% of the time you'll have a land on top of the library, and that will mean you will dig deeper into the actual action cards. So I think it will be played begrudgingly in the decks. It won't be like the top quite common by any stretch of imagination, but because it puts this thing on itself, it doesn't require anything else. It's much more flexible. And then we have obviously Busted Twisted Sewer Witch, the 5-mana 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black rat creature token, and then rats cannot block generally. And then for each rat you control, create a Wicked Roll token attached to that rat. So if you had like a couple of rats flying around, this card becomes insanely powerful, because it's basically sort of like a Mouth of Sauron, where it's a 3/4 that generates potentially between 2 and maybe 4 power when it enters the battlefield. Also, mind you, those rats will die pinking something, so pinging the opponent. So when opponent is low on life, it will become a really problematic card to deal with. I had to play against it, and it is pretty strong. Then there are roll tricks. There's 4 cards in the set that at instant speed can assign rolls. Not Dead After All, the modern staple. That's a 1 mana instant, and until end of turn, target creature you control gains. When this creature dies, you return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and then create a Wicked Roll token attached to it. Now, obviously, apart from being used in Rakdos Evoke, the famous Rakdos Evoke deck, it's a trick like we had a lot of the time. It's going to become much better when you have good ETB effects. Like one mini combo I've noticed is it does include a rare card, but I think it's a perfect card with Gumdrop Poisoner, a 3/2 lifelinker. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -X, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. So you attack with your Gumdrop Poisoner, it gets blocked, it deals 3 damage, you gain 3 life, you play Not Dead After All, it comes back, it gives -3/-3 to something, like a sweet 1-2 card combo, and you're still left with a 4/3 lifelinker that when it dies, pink something. So like, yeah. And I'm sure that there will be it's Not Dead After All with Twisted Sewer Witch is also going to be great. So you have to look for that. You have to look for those kind of synergies. Then we have Monstrous Rage. That's a 1 mana +2/+0 and create a monster roll token attached to the target. So basically 1 mana +3/+1 and trample. That looks really sweet in a very aggressive deck. Especially when you are going to be, attacking with something really big that the opponent will have to commit to kill, and they will just decide that Exactis is what we want to go. Well, they will be nastily surprised because not only you push some damage through, but also save your creature. But it is more aggressive than anything. It's going to be great with this first strike creature that I talked about, the 2/1 that has first strike on your turn. Not as good defensively because, again, it only boosts toughness by 1. But, rate is pretty good on it. And the fact that the +1/+1 stays permanently and you already win the combat thanks to it, so you have another shot of attacking with that creature, is something that you shouldn't be ignoring at all. And then we have the Ferocious Werewolf, Elf Fox Warrior. For 4 mana, it's a 4/3 trample, but it has the adventure side at instant speed, 2 mana, create a monster roll token attached to target creature you control. So I don't know how often you'll have time to play this as a combat trick. Maybe if you draw it like super late in the game and you have 6 mana, you attack, someone blocks, whatever, you use the roll as beneficially as you possibly can, and then you play the 4/3. Mind you that the problem with adventures is that when opponent fizzles the adventure, you won't get the creature. And you will hear that a lot, I think, in the content creation, that this is like a big drawback of the adventure. But on the other hand, I thought about it from a slightly different perspective, that usually the problem of losing a big thing is that you invested a ton of mana into it. If your opponent is going to dedicate cards to kill something just because it gets a monster roll and that you pay 2 mana for, at least you didn't waste 4 mana on the Ferocious Werewolf that they could have killed at the same time. So you're slightly ahead on mana and you only lost 1 card anyway, because these cards are 2/1s naturally. So it's sad that you lose the adventure, and I would definitely play around things that can blow you when you play that kind of a trick. But think about it from the efficiency perspective. Not losing mana is sometimes okay. And you have the last thing, Royal Treatment. That's going to be the thing that will blow out your aggressively slanted adventure cards. That's basically giving protection or hexproof to target creature you control. So and puts a royal roll attached to that creature, so it permanently gets +1/+1 and ward 1. So you can imagine someone playing removal, or removal that is a part of an adventure, and you playing Royal Treatment. Their adventure will go to graveyard. You spend 1 mana. You're super happy about it. Your creature is even better. So yeah, think about all those tricks when you're starting to play, because I think that early weeks, this is the moment when playing around tricks is going to be complicated. Obviously, these are not the only tricks in the format. These are the only tricks that create a roll. And because also they create roll at instant speed, these are one of the few cards that can somehow trigger celebration on the opponent's turn. So who knows? Maybe one time in the format you will be able to do that. And you play Royal Treatment, you play Ferocious Werefox, and all of a sudden your 3/1 becomes a 3/3, and you put a roll on it. Okay. There are some synergies with rolls, and they come in multiple packages, I would say. And I put individual card representatives of them, but there are multiple cards in each category. Tanglespun Lookout is a 3-mana uncommon. It's a 2/3. When an aura enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So it's sort of like Aura Enchantress thing. I think the card looks pretty good if you have enough auras in your deck. Remember, if you play Selesnya, you not only have you don't only have the offensive auras, you also have the defensive auras, like the new pacifism variant, which looks, you won't hear me saying that very often, but I think that the pacifism in the new set looks really strong, especially because there is not much, permanent removal, and this is it for 5 mana, and you can even spread it across several turns. But it's not the only even enchantress in the set. There's also a rare one that draws a card when enchantments enter the battlefield. So there's a couple of the effects like this, and these will be good because those aura kind of decks will have a problem of running out of cards, and this maybe will stop it from happening. Also, it's good that there are lots of those cards that both are creatures and generate auras at the same time. So unlike in the normal format, when you have to play both auras and creatures and A plus B must come together, here very frequently you just need one card and it provides both abilities, because they will put a roll and at the same time put a creature onto the battlefield. And because of that, I think that this kind of mechanic becomes much more viable, because you are not bound by this A plus B dynamics that's so often disappointed when you start playing the format. And also, like creatures with auras are going to be good independently. Without the Tanglespun Lookout, this is going to be just like a cherry on top of your deck as an additional powerful card that opponents have to deal with. And if they deal with it, then they still have to deal with your aura enchanted creatures, which are still quite strong. So there's the one like this. There are creatures that make your enchanted creatures stronger, and cards that make your enchanted creatures stronger. And one example I gave is Archon of the Wild Rose. That's a 4-mana 4/4 flyer, which is already like, I'm playing that no matter what anyway. But if you can get some roll synergies, it says that other creatures you control that are enchanted by auras you control have a base power and toughness 4/4 and have flying. So anything with the roll becomes all of a sudden a 4/4 that has the aura, so it becomes a 5/5, I guess, and has flying and whatever the aura gave, and that will probably end games like on the spot when you play it right. And if not, then it's still like a 4/4 flyer that they have to deal with somehow. So that card looks busted. But we have the green-white signpost uncommon, and that makes that your enchanted creatures have +1/+1 on top of everything. And there is one enchantment that creatures with auras get +2/+2. So like a double anthem when you have creatures with auras. I think that the latter one is like maybe once in hundreds of decks you draft, you will come. It will basically work, but you can always dream. I'm pretty sure that this card maybe early is going to be picked and people will try to meme around it, but later in the format it's going to start approaching the wheel, and maybe then you can build a sweet deck. And then there's another card that is sort of like a one-off, Yenna Redtooth Regent, but I will talk about it later, so I'm going to skip it for now. There are also cards that synergize with auras and enchantments in general. And rolls are, the easiest way of generating enchantments in this format. One is Graceful Takedown. That's the bite spell. For 2 mana, any number of target enchanted creatures you control and up to one other target creature you control deal each damage equal to their power to target creature you don't control. So, if you have like 3 creatures with auras or 2 creatures with auras and 1 without, you can make sure that you kill something, or you can like team up and kill something really big for 2 mana, which is okay. I guess that, even if you play it as a bite spell, it's going to be fine. It is a sorcery speed, so not super, but because of the small upside in some decks, it's going to become basically a 2 mana unconditional removal. Then we have Rhyme for Reindeer. I do like that card. Hopefully, I'm not going to be completely missing on it, but Sven the Reindeer looks pretty strong. It's 4 mana 3/4, and whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature and opponent control. This is sort of like a pivot card. It has the tap synergies, but it also has enchantment synergies. And I was thinking, like, where would I probably prefer to play it? And I came to the conclusion that I would prefer to play it in the sort of like Selesnya enchantments deck rather than Azorius tap deck. Because in Selesnya enchantments deck, I'm surely going to play enchantments. In Azorius tap deck, I'm not guaranteed to play those enchantments. And also, in the tap deck, I probably want to control the board and at some stage start attacking with something that is, evasion. So I don't need to tap anything. I mean, I might do it for some extra value, but that doesn't seem like playing a 4 mana 3/4 is the way to do it. I do think that in a white-green deck, very often the problem that you run into is you stall the board and you cannot get through because like one blocker is just stopping you from doing that. And I think that Rhyme for Reindeer, being able to tap like a couple of creatures without any mana investment, just by playing the things that you want to be playing anyway, is going to be a decent way of breaking those board stalls and making sure that you can deal those last couple of damage. So this sort of like a card that gives you slight reach when you have enchantment synergies. I also don't want to see the situation when you play it in white-black and you all of a sudden play the witch and you put like 3 wicked rolls on your rats and tap the board and go for lethal. And then we have Red Tooth Vanguard. That's a 2 mana 3/1 with trample. As I said, 2 mana 3/1s are interesting creatures from the perspective of if opponent stumbles, this card is very quickly making sure that you're going to win the game. That's why I think that they're naturally stronger in best of 3 than best of 1, because in best of 1 people will always get the mana, so they will stumble less frequently. But it's a 3/1 with trample, and whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 if you do return Red Tooth Vanguard from your graveyard to your hand. And again, like a 3/1 later in the game with trample is still going to be decent. 80% of creatures at common have toughness 3 or less, so it deals with quite a large selection of what your opponent can chuck at you. Also, you get this free draw of a card at some stage. Well, not free 2 mana, but whatever. And because of that, you sort of can out attrition your opponent in a color that normally does not have access to that kind of attrition. I think that green has at least a couple of things that are really letting it stay and recoup the card advantage. One of them being, for example, this Tanglespan Lookout that we talked before. So yeah, I think that these are like the cards that can support the role. I don't think that you need to go particularly hard on the aura synergies for those cards to be decent. But it will help when you have some of those things. But probably you will naturally want to have some of those things anyway. So it's not like a big... you don't need to go out of your way to put those synergies into your deck. It's just that you probably will change some prioritization during your draft, depending. Like if you picked like a mid of the pack Tanglespan Lookout in pack 1, you might want to skew slightly differently. Enchantments are not only white-green domain. White-black seems to have this enchantments die synergy, and that's epitomized by the Niva, the Stalked by Nightmares. That's the Ords of Signpost. A 4 mana, 2/2 menace. When it ETBs, return target creature or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. And whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Neva and then scry 1. So a 4 mana Gravedigger with Menace that is harder to cast than Legendary is, I guess, okay. If you can make it into a 3/3, and that card becomes pretty solid. And I think it's not going to be very difficult to make it to a 3/3 because you can bargain away enchantments, you can sacrifice some of them. Some of them are auras that naturally die, so there's like plenty of ways of getting the enchantments in your graveyard. I'm not going to say that this is something that will be natural. I think that this is something you need to actively build towards. But I think that there are several cards that do support the archetype. One of them is like Knight of Doves. That's a 3 mana 1/3. Whenever enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, make a 1/1 bird creature token with flying. There is Ashiok's Reaper. That's a 4 mana 3/3. Whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. Now, question is, how easy are those death triggers going to be? And this is what I think bargain part of things, and making disposable enchantments is going to come in handy, because obviously you don't want to like sacrifice your value enchantment. You want to sacrifice something that is maybe less important. And these cards like Neva and Knight of Doves or Ashiok's Reaper, which, don't quote me that this is an excellent card. I don't think it is, but it does have the enchantment dice synergy. There are other ones. There is the Tabby that makes a 1/1 rat. There is 2/3 vigilance that becomes a 3/4 vigilance or whatever, gets a counter every time enchantment dies. These cards are all looking like those small pieces will be just enough to warrant you sacrificing a roll rather than sacrificing a food token or whatever treasure token for your bargain costs. So hopefully, if you build a deck with just enough of those synergies, it will become quite interesting. And also importantly, black and white, they do have those common enchantments that you can sacrifice freely to scribe, and that do have some effect that I think are going to be very, very important for those for this archetype to actually work. So Nitrous Mob says that they're really iffy on that archetype. I'm curious about it. I think that especially the 2/3 vigilance, again, Jason is the person that swayed me towards it. The 2/3 vigilant creature that when an enchantment dies is a card that I'm going to be super interested how that one works, because I think that 3 mana 2/3 vigilance is close to being okay. If you put 1 counter on that thing, I think it's going to be pretty good. If you put 2 counters, that's going to be great, because there is very little unconditional removal in the set, and 5 toughness is going to be very hard to deal with, especially when you have vigilance that provides sort of like they cannot swing back, and it's becoming complicated. And if you add those little additions like the Neva or Knight of Doves on top of it, I think you might be onto something. The question is, how frequently are you going to be able to get both the payoffs and the enablers at the same time, and the bargain spells and blah, blah, blah. So yeah. And the sagas are pretty strong in white and black. So I would definitely also don't forget that there are those sagas that can naturally die. Oh, wait, I'm ahead of myself. Here are the cards that make enchantments die very easily. So we have things like sagas that, when you get the 3rd chapter, that thing dies. Even though Princess Takes Flight maybe is a bad example, because this one you don't want to get to chapter 3. This one we want to sacrifice it on the next turn or bounce it back to your hand and replay it or something. But there are other sagas that will die and will trigger those enchantment die. There are 2 important cards, namely Hopeful Vigil and the black one that I still didn't memorize the name, that have this ability: 3 mana, sacrifice it, and when it dies, you also scry 2, which helps you to dig into additional enablers for your deck. So this will help it. And obviously, big thing, bargain allows you only to sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token, not creature, which is important for other decks. But cards with bargain are going to be particularly important for those type of decks, because then you can just sacrifice some useless or semi-useful role if the benefits are going to be outweighing it. Yeah, the Black Saga is great because it makes 2 enchantments for that kind of purpose. And also, again, rolls on your creatures are going to be traded, and opponent at some stage will have a difficult choice. Like, should I block this 2/2 with a wicked roll on it and kill it, knowing that it will also grow Neva, make a 1/1 bird, and let you draw a card? That's going to be a difficult choice for the opponent to do. I mean, obviously, I'm talking here about a super optimistic scenario, but even making that 1/1 flyer when you trade a 3/3 with their 3/3 is going to be a choice that they have to weigh very carefully. Whew. Okay, we are done with the roles and the enchantment synergies. We can look at the adventures. And obviously, adventures are natural 2/1s. What is important about the adventures in general is that they do increase 2 things, and that's natural spell density. And at the same time, they make 5 mana spells that have a cheaper adventure on them more playable, which means that the 5 mana value archetype can be something. I'm not saying it's going to be great, but I'm saying is that you can play more 5 mana spells because those 5 mana spells have a 2 mana adventure that maybe bounces something attached to it. Another thing is that in this set, we're going to get adventures that are in a different color than the main spell. And that allows multicolor mini splashes. I already did it in my pre-release when I just put Crystal Grotto in my blue-black deck because I had one thing that had a white spell on it. And just for that, I just put this Crystal Grotto. If I drew it, I could play also the white spell that destroys a attacking creature or tapped creature, whatever. But it was on the 3/3 flyer for 4 mana, which I thought I'm still going to be playing in my deck. So I might as well put that Crystal Grotto because it has Scry. So it's not that terrible, and I'm still going to have my 8 mountains, 8 swamps, 8 islands. So it's not going to ruin my mana base. Worst case scenario, I'm going to filter my mana, which I did once. And I never managed to draw it together with the white spell. But still, I mean, this is something that you might be doing in your deck. And yeah, as I said, I listened to the Mark Rosewater's podcast, and the design leader for the set was talking about their idea was to make creatures okay to good on rate without looking at the adventure part. And the adventure part is small benefits towards that okay on rate creature. And here we have an example, Grubby Giant, 4 mana, 4/3 reach, that has an ability that is relevant in the later game, sacrifice an artifact or land, draw a card. And it has a small adventure of creating a treasure, so it basically can ramp itself out on turn 3 if you want to play it like that. Or enable some splash or ramp something else. And there's like bazillion other things that it can do. For free reach with the sacrifice an artifact or land draw a card ability is okay, I guess. I mean, I'd rather have it a 4/4, but that I think would have been approaching the push territory. And the adventure is a small spell that does something and it can be potentially useful, generating that 1 token that you can bargain away, for example. So yeah, adventures are focused in Timur colors. Each color in the Timur, so green, blue, and red, they have 12 adventures each. There are 7 white adventures and 8 black adventures, with very few commons in there. Like most of the white and black adventure spells are at higher rarities. And then there's 28 of them are monocolored, 22 are multicolored. And because this is going to be a nightmare to remember, there's 24 of them are sorcery, 26 of them are instant. Some of them that look like an instant are sorceries. Some of them probably will be instants on paper, but not on arena. because they just seem so instant. And then there are sorcery. I was playing with the Virtue of Persistence, the black one, and that removal is a sorcery. And I just like realized at the end of my opponent's turn, I'm looking at it. Oh, why did I leave the mana open? I could have killed it on my turn. Well, I guess I'm doing it next turn. And here's a perfect example of this adventure synergy with the 5 mana spells, or generally more expensive creatures. 4 mana 3/4 flyer is nothing that will excite me nowadays in Magic. But I think that together with the Desperate Parry instant that gives target creature -4/-0 until end of turn, I'm down to play Obira's Attendants because I will be able to either prolong my life or even maybe profitably block something or double block something big and kill it, because the -4/-0 is going to be relevant for that. But at the same time, later in the game, I'm just going to play that 3/4 flyer that I drew from my 2 mana combat trick, which is great, and that can trigger my 5 mana synergies, or make a late game kind of finisher in the control deck. Domino Man, it's going to be not only here, but also in the podcast form and on YouTube. So yeah, it's going to be available everywhere. So first thing I want to talk about at Adventures is the spell synergy. And well, first of all, red and blue seems to want to be that spell synergy deck. When you are casting some spells, you get some effects. And also, these are the colors when you will have the 24 adventure cards in both colors with multiple commons as well. You have 2 of the adventure spells that are Izzet, and one of this Frolicking Familiar, the 3 mana 2/2 flyer with prowess. That also has an instant part of it. For 1 red, you can deal 1 damage to any target, like a very cute removal spell. It will kill something really small in the beginning, and later it becomes like a threat that grows. It is adorable also, and people don't know that it has flying. I also played it in my pre-release deck, and my opponent just like tried to block it, and I'm like, mate, flying. I was like, how do otters fly? And the answer is, of course, broom. Broom, that's how they fly. They have a magic broom that makes them fly. But I do agree that if you're playing pre-release and you don't know the cards by heart, it is massively annoying to look at the otter and not expect it to be flying. But like a really cute card that both has a payoff for casting spells and is a spell. It's easily castable as a sort of like a 3 mana 2/2 flyer that pings for 1. Yeah, it's perfect. Then you have like Picklock Prankster. That's another adventure spell that synergizes with casting spells. So this one has Flying and Vigilance 1/3 for 2 mana, which is meh. But if you're into fairies and flying chip damage, that's perfectly fine. The Vigilance means it might attack and block some smaller creatures. It has an adventure. Mill 4 cards. Then you can put an instant sorcery or fairy card from among the milled cards into your hand. There is a bunch of adventure cards that are also fairies, and there is a bunch of other fairies. So that will, if you play that in your spells deck, you want to make sure that a bunch of your other cards in the deck that are not spells are fairies, because that will mean that you hit almost on everything. For example, the one that we looked before, Obira's Attendants, the 5 mana 3/4 flyer is a fairy. So if you would mill it, you will be able to return to your hand. However, the otter, you wouldn't be able, because in the graveyard, Frolicking Familiar is just a creature otter wizard. It's not an instant, even though it has an instant tagged into it, and it's not a sorcery nor a fairy. So that's unfortunately the problem with this card. We're going to look into stats of it next slide. But and the other one, the rare Izzet adventure card, is a 2 mana 2/1 red creature on the front side. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 3 or less, it pings the opponent for 1. whenever opponent casts a spell with mana value 3 or less, it pings the opponent, and it has a sorcery. I'm going to again probably forget that it's a sorcery multiple times before I figure that one out. 2 mana bounce, normal permanent to its owner hand. So if you were wondering with the Picklock Prankster, I simulated if you have 30 cards left in your deck, if you have 5 targets for it, you get like 50% chance of drawing a card. If you have 10, it jumps to 82%. And, like above 13 targets left in your deck, you go to 91% that you're going to draw a card from that Picklock Prankster. So that card will not always draw your card. I'm assuming that most of the time when you cast it, you're going to have between 7 and 11 targets in your deck. So 2/3 of the time, 1/3 of the time, up to maybe 1/6 of the time, you will miss on it. Still, even if you miss on it, you end up with the 1/3 flying vigilant fairy in your hand. So there is something to be gained from that. But I'm going to be super curious about, is this card playable or is it just rubbish? There are cards with spell synergies. We already talked about the splashy spellcaster that puts sorcery rolls on other creatures you control. So again, card has a problem of both needing to cast instants and sorceries and having creatures, which hopefully adventures will solve. There is the Mocking Sprite. That's a 3 mana, 2/1 flyer, and instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Some people are quite high on it. I think it's not great. I think that 3 mana, 2/1 flyer is just not good enough without drawing me a card and maybe, like gaining a life or something like that. If it only gives me like a mana discount potentially at some stage, I'm not that interested because it doesn't give me any upfront value. Again, especially with there are a couple of one mana, 1 damage pink spells that will be playable. There is also Aquatic Alchemist, 2 mana, 1/3. Whenever you cast first instant or sorcery spell each turn, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And it has a 3 mana sorcery adventure. Put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. Again, I'm not super impressed by that card. And generally, I'm not super impressed so far by what I saw about the spell synergy archetype. I'm talking about it because it's there, but it's also important that it looks quite underwhelming because I think it's got like this mismatch of spells that cannot kill everything with creatures that don't kill very quickly. And that is, in my opinion, a problem for that kind of a deck because if you can't deal with everything that the opponent chucks at you and can't kill quickly, then you're running into troubles of being very quickly overwhelmed. When opponents start dropping like a 6/6 trample creatures and you're like pinging with a fairy for 1 every turn, or like tapping and untapping your catapult or something, you're going to lose that game most of the time. And I think that this is what it looks to me like in terms of the blue-red. I might be mistaken, but because blue doesn't have any aggressive rolls, it might be problematic for it to deal those quick damages. There is I like this kind of a deck when you have like a couple of 2 mana, 2/1 flyers. Like 2 mana, 2/1 flyers are perfect for that kind of a deck. 3 mana, 2/1 flyers, that's not the same clock. So yeah. Frolicking Familiar does rock. We have other cards. So there's the Unruly Catapult. That's the 0/4 Defender artifact. So we can bargain it. It's important to know. It taps to pink for 1, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, untap it. Interestingly enough, it does work with Curiosity, if I'm not mistaken. So you can put Curiosity in your catapult, and every ping is a card that you draw, which is a cute interaction. I think that the power of that deck will, I think, very much depend on how strong the Hearth Elemental is. That's a 6 mana creature. It's a 4/5, and it costs X less, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard that are instant sorcery or have an adventure. And I think that, and also has an adventure that says discard your hand, then draw 2 cards. And I think that, like, if this deck is decent, it will stabilize the board with some like ping removal, bounce, whatever for the first turns, and run out of cards. And then as it runs out of cards, it will cast Stoke of Genius, discard maybe 1 or even 0 cards, draw 2 cards, and then play this thing for 1. And then you're in business, because you drew 2 cards. You put the 4/5 on board for 1 mana, which is always a good deal. 5 toughness is a lot in this set. Yeah, if this card is good, then maybe the decks that have this card are going to be also good. And Johan, Apprentice Sorcerer, that also looks okay, because 5 toughness is going to be very hard to deal with. That's a 4 mana, 2/5, one of the classic stat lines of Horseshoe Crab, whichever crab it was. And you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and once each turn, you may cast instant or sorcery spell from the top of your library. That does include adventures. Wishcoin Crab, that's the one. So it's like a 2/5 that blocks pretty well. It's not aggressive still, and that again is the problem of this archetype, in my opinion. But it will get you cards over time, and especially when you have like instants, you can even draw 2 cards, because you can cast the sorcery or cast 1 spell on your turn, then you reveal an instant on. You can play it on the other turn, whatnot. Yeah. I think that one thing that is in favor of the archetype is that there are a couple of decent looking counter spells, and there is an instant speed draw 2 spell, so you can get those kind of packages when you play draw go, and then if it's something dangerous, you counter it and you ping with the catapult, and if there is nothing that endangers you in any way, you just draw 2 cards and get more fuel. So yeah. Okay. In terms of the 5 mana value synergies, that's not like a super strongly supported archetype. There are adventures which help you with those 5 mana spells. And here I have a couple of examples. The Obira's Attendants we talked about. That's the 5 mana 3/4 flyer that has a cheap adventure. In the same guess, there is the 6 mana 6/5 Stormkill Vanguard, Giant Warrior, that is very evasive. And at the same time, it has a 2 mana sorcery speed adventure, destroy target artifact or enchantment. If that was an instant speed, that would be like playable in constructed, I guess. But it's a sorcery speed disenchant, which is not as good. But like a 6 drop that can be relevant early in the game is great. And we have a reverse situation with the Galvanic Giant, which is a 4 mana 3/3, a giant, obviously. Also with the synergy to the 5 drops, because whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you can tap target a creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. But its spell part, the adventure part, is 7 mana. So it is an instant 7 mana, draw 4 cards, then discard 2 cards. I guess like a super late game, or when you super ramp into it, you basically draw 4 cards and discard 2 cards, and you end up with this hill giant that hopefully you will be able to also draw into some 5 mana spells that will allow you to clog the board basically with it. So these are like the adventures that can be 5 spells, and there's plenty of others. There is the 6 mana 6/5 blue creature that has some kind of a bounce effect attached to it and whatever. But of course, you can't play those decks if you don't have an early game and some other synergies. One card that looks very underwhelming, but is the Stormkill Prowler, the 2 mana 2/1. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. The problem is that what do you do with it before that? Like normally those cards are good because they can clog the board, make you survive. I would prefer this card to be like an 0/3 for 2 mana with that ability, because then at least I could block like a 2/2 until I get to my 5 mana and then start making it bigger. Like an 0-3 Vigilant. That would be perfect. Maybe too strong then. But a 2-1 that just basically you can throw away with a block or do nothing with it, or opponent does nothing and it doesn't matter what you really have. Then you have Troyan Gutsy Explorer. That's the signpost for it. It's a 3 mana 1-3, and it has tap make green-blue mana, so 2 mana. And you can spend it only to cast spells with mana value 5 or greater, or spells with X in their mana costs. So you can play it on turn 3, and on turn 4 you can play a 6-drop potentially. But also it has like a blue to tap, draw a card, and then discard a card, so it's a looter on top of everything. So yeah, I mean, that's fine, but it's not like super exciting. And then you have Up the Beanstalk, another modern staple, it seems. 2 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you draw a card. And that looks pretty decent, but it's a heavy build around area. Because if I play this card, I want to have both Bargain, 5 mana spells, and maybe some other synergies with it. Like, I don't know, cast an enchantment or something. It does replace itself, but at the same time, it's not that we're living in a Magic world where tapping 2 mana on your turn 2 to cast this and not affecting the board in terms of creatures is going to be great. Yes, you draw a card and then maybe you can play a 3-drop, but you will not be up to a good start. And those 5 mana kind of cast big things later in the game decks, they don't have a problem with dominating the late game. They have a problem with surviving till the late game, and Up the Beanstalk is not helping absolutely in any way whatsoever. Yeah, of course you will have like amazing curve outs with the kind of a deck, because you have cards that will let you ramp your mana. I think that, yeah, like Utopia Sprawl in the enchantment slot of the set looks amazing as a card, because it's a one mana acceleration that also is hard to interact with. So yeah. Food. Food is a Golgari-centered mechanic in the set. There are 23 cards in the set that do have some sort of food interactions. Most of them are black and green cards, but there are also 5 colorless artifacts that are food, and some of them are also creatures at the same time. And there are alternative use of food enablers, so cards that let you use food not only to gain 3 life, but in some kind of another way. And, like a good example here is Welcome to Sweet Tooth Saga. Chapter 1, make a 1/1 human. Chapter 2, create a food token, so you get your food produced. And Chapter 3, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of foods you control. So if you had a couple of foods lying around, it will give +3/+3 to a creature permanently, which seems like a great deal for 2 mana. Yeah. It's like a great little synergy piece that just makes a couple of small things that look pretty decent. So first, let's look at, there are 3 food generators, and by food generators I mean cards that can make multiple foods. One is Scream Puff. That's a 5 mana 4/5 with Death Touch, and when it deals damage to a player, create a food token. And I think that card is actually going to be fine. It looks like it doesn't look exciting. We've seen that type of card a lot of the time, but I think it aligns pretty well with the removal in this set. I think that Candy Grapple only gets it at common, except for the clunky 5 mana removal, which means you will not be frequently in a situation when you play this like 5 mana 4/5 and then you just lose it to a 3 mana spell. So that looks pretty decent on it. And of course, as I said, this is probably a card that is the best target for the Monster Saga. Giving it trample is great because you will always connect, you will always make the food, it will trample most of the damage through. Then there is Restless Cottage. That's the rare person land. Enters the battlefield tapped, add black or green. You can, for 4 mana, make it a 4/4 black and green horror creature until end of turn, and when it attacks, create a food token. Yeah, Thebes. Scream Puff is sort of like a Death Touch lifelink. So yeah. Yeah, Shieldred at home. Okay, maybe Shieldred is a bit of a stretch to compare, but I see where you're coming from. uh, Skybeast Tracker is a 4-mana 2/4 with reach, and when you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, create a food token. So you will be able to maybe generate a couple. But this card looks pretty bad to me. So I'm hoping that I won't have to play Skybeast Tracker. Sacramental, I think that all those rare lands are pretty good. Especially, they're just fixing lands. They're decent fixing lands that will occasionally become a problem. And in the pre-release, I played with an opponent that played turn 1 green-blue land, and I'm playing my fairies, and I don't have any instant speed interaction that can deal with this land. And I'm thinking, like, how the hell I'm going to win with this? It turns out the answer was a couple of flyers and a curiosity on one of them. But without that, I would be in trouble against that land. Okay, so these are the food generators that can generate multiple foods. There are also food generators that just do one thing. And example, Gingerbread Hunter, 5 mana, 5/5. When it ETBs, create a food token. It also has an adventure, 3 mana. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Like an excellent top end creature that also has some early interaction that is maybe not like amazing, but will be good enough. -2/-2 is way better than deal 2 damage because, of course, it can be used as a sort of reverse combat trick. But it will also make a food token that you can later use for something else. There is Feed the Cauldron. That's the 3 mana, destroy target creature with mana value 3 or less. And it's funny because I heard like a bunch of set reviews, and everyone was comparing it to the card that, again, I forgot the name, but the thing that destroys a creature with power 3 or less. Vanquish the Weak, that's the name. It's not. Power 3 or less is not the same as mana value 3 or less. Power 3 or less you very often cast on creatures that cost 5 mana. This one you can only kill a creature that costs 3 mana. So yeah, now that I know that, the card looks much worse because obviously you will always be trading even on mana. The food is the only small benefit you might be getting there. But it does generate food if you cast it on your turn. And then there is Return from the Wilds. I think early start, but it looks to me like this is going to be a very important card for green because it does a lot of things. You choose 2. You either search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle, which is both ramping and fixing. So it allows you to play multicolor strategies at the same time as playing strategies that have higher mana value things in your deck. Especially in best of 1, ramping to 5 lands quickly is going to be maybe backbreaking. Then it can make a 1/1 human creature token, or you can make a food token. And most of the time, you will either you will get the land and either make a 1/1 human or food token. And I know that probably most people think that human is going to be chosen more frequently because you make this 1/1 creature. However, if I'm playing the Hamlet Gluttons, the 7 mana things that can cost 5 mana, that's a 6/6 trampler that gains 3 life on ATB, I'm probably going to frequently choose to create a food token because I know that the food token is more likely to survive to the next turn than a 1/1 human. So just to be safe and ensure myself I can cast the Glutton, I will probably frequently pick a food token. And in some decks, that food will be a thing that can generate additional value. So I think that this food part of this card is going to be quite relevant more frequently than not. I think that the card gains a lot from having that food option as opposed to just being make a 1/1 human and search library for a basic land that it could have been. And then there are food payoffs. At common, there is the Sweet Tooth Witch. That's a 3 mana human warlock. It's a 3/2. When it ETBs, you create a food token. So it's a self-contained synergy. It just triggers and makes food on its own. And for 2 mana, you can sacrifice a food and have target player lose 2 life. So you have like 3 food lying around. Your opponent has basically virtual 6 damage already on top of anything. And that's a scary thing to be living under. So I think that Sweet Tooth Witch is going to be a card that will be scary in some matchups, and you will definitely want to kill it on sight in those. And as Sacramental in chat notices, notably, this card does not need to tap, which means that you can use it at the turn with ETBs, unlike the Eldraine version of it that require tapping. And you can do multiple foods at the same turn. So like turn 7, if you have 7 mana, you can just play Sweet Tooth Witch and instantly shoot 2 foods into opponent's face. One of those foods will be generated also by the witch. So there you go. Then we have at uncommon, we have Greta the Sweet Tooth Scourge. That's the signpost for the Golgari deck. 3 mana, 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, create a food token. So again, something that doesn't need anything extra. It already comes with some value. And, it's a 3 mana, 3/3. So not great, but not terrible. And then for green, you can sacrifice a food to put a counter on target creature as a sorcery. So you cannot do it in combat. And at any speed, you can sacrifice a food for 1 and a black, and you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So you can basically turn your food into cards later in the game if you have enough life. Which you should if you are playing food. Bloody better be gaining life, damn it. Then we have a very interesting card, and I wanted very much to be great. But I don't know if it's going to be great. And that's a 4 mana Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. It's an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, guess what? Create food. And all the foods you control have tap to add green to your mana pool. And for 7 mana, you can sacrifice the Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. Creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of foods you control. Activate only as sorcery. I think that, it would be sweet if the Sweet's Revenge was a great card. I don't know if there's just going to be a density of foods that you can get in order to make it work. But, if you play your cards right, you can play some kind of a Sultai concoction. You get some 5 mana spells kind of synergies. The foods are your mana rocks, and then you can cast those 5 things more actively, whatever. And at the end of at the end of the game, you just sacrifice it to make everything gigantic and just kill your opponent. I think Sacramental. I completely agree with you. I think it should give trample or maybe cost less. If it gave trample, I think it would be an amazing build around card. And right now, it's a card that I see that there is a potential, but I just don't know if that potential is going to be fulfilled, because it's sad if you sacrifice this and you lose that foods you control become mana rocks, and your opponent chumps you into oblivion, and you're still going to be very much ahead, but you invested like a lot of mana into that. And then there are other food payoffs. Notably, one is at rare. That's the Goose Mother. Blue, green, X, Bird Hydra. It's a 2/2 with flying and enters with X +1/+1 counters. So, spend 5 mana, it's a 5/5. Spend 4 mana, it's a 4/4. It's always going to be great. Like that card, you just like play blindly. You don't need to think about it. But when it enters the battlefield, it creates half X food tokens rounded up. Very useful syntax there. And whenever it attacks, you may sacrifice a food to draw a card. So, Hydroid Crasis, slightly worse because it gets you fewer things, but also slightly better because it's a much bigger creature. So I still don't know. Is it better than Crasis or worse? It doesn't really matter. They are not going to be in the same format. I think both of them are absolute bombs. But if you generate some food, it can draw you a bunch of cards at some stage. Then we have a Tough Cookie, and this is more like because I saw in the chat that the issue with Knight of the Sweet's Revenge is that you want to sacrifice your foods rather than keep them. I think that Tough Cookie is a perfect card to play with the Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, because this one wants you to keep the foods, because Tough Cookie is a 2 mana 2/2 food creature. And when it enters battlefield, you create 1 more food, so you get 2 foods for 2 mana. And for 3 mana, it turns non-creature artifact you control into a 4/4 artifact creature until end of turn. So basically, If you have a bunch of food lying around, you can tap some of that food for mana. If you have Knight of the Sweet Revenge, turn it into 4/4s and start attacking. And once you accrue enough mana, you can also sack the... yeah, I think that basically the flavor is that it cannot turn itself into a 4/4 for 3 mana. Obviously, Tough Cookie itself can sacrifice itself for 3 life, as any food can. And the one weird synergy with the food is Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender. That's a 2 mana 3/1 artifact creature, legendary, food knight. And there is some planeswalker text that will become relevant if your opponent plays Ashok, but most of the time they won't. So another thing that it has on it, it's the... I guess, is Sir Ginger the questing beast of the set? Like, look at it. Look how much text this card has. Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender, has trample, hexproof, and haste as long as an opponent controls a planeswalker. Whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Sir Ginger and scry 1. And then, of course, you can sacrifice it to gain life equals to its power, so not necessarily 3. If it grew bigger, you can gain more. You can put, I don't know, if there's some kind of an infinite loop, you can gain infinite life. So Sir Ginger, you can sacrifice other foods you control to make it bigger. Basically, that's the gist of it. And foods are, of course, easy to sacrifice. And you can also sacrifice, I don't know, treasures or something. Yeah, it's great with treasures more than food, but I mean, it's still pretty good with food. I wonder if you can make a deck with the white guy that makes treasures every turn if your opponent has more lands than you do. Interesting thought. Okay, that's end of the food payoffs. We can move on finally to the bargain. And bargain is the glue of this mechanic of this set. I think that every single mechanic, maybe apart from the celebration that we talked about so far, somewhat will be glued together with bargain. First of all, it's mainly a Sultai mechanic. There are 20 bargain cards, and 5 of them reside in each Sultai color. And then there's 3 red ones and 2 white ones. So we already can see that anything that has red and anything that has white will be slightly disadvantaged in terms of how much bargaining they can do, which is important because white, I think it's a design feature that they put so little bargain in white, because I think if there was more bargaining in white, white would have been probably busted. So I also want you to draw attention to those 2 white bargain cards. I think of those 2, one is probably quite playable, and that's a 1 mana combat trick. I think that this is going to be a very important card in white, and probably you will be getting it late, early in the format, but I think that this is a card that people are going to be fighting for at a certain stage of the format. Because bargain is a key mechanic to unlock synergies and basically every combination of colors. The bargain is a key to unlock certain synergies. So I looked at all those bargain cards and I identified sort of 4 types of them. One is add an ETB effect to a creature. One is a mana discount effect, so basically you get your spell cheaper. One is like adding extras to a spell, and as in new effects. And the other one is to amplify an existing effects of a spell. So when we look at the ETB bargains, very easy examples. Tenacious Tome Seeker, 3 mana, 3/2. Absolutely not exciting. But if you bargain with it, when it enters the battlefield, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So, like, this is a huge upgrade on that card. Like, 3 mana, 3/2 is garbage. 3 mana, 3/2 that draws you a card with some selection in some cases, and it draws you a spell rather than a land. Now that looks like a really strong card. So, like, this card I want to be playing, and I want to make sure that I can bargain with it, which might be trickier than you think, because blue is not particularly great in making things that you can bargain with. So I don't know if this card is going to be good, But if it's not going to be good, it's probably because you just won't be able to bargain frequently enough with it. And because of that, it will become a much weaker card. Then we have High Fae Negotiator. I heard the name Siege Fae being called like that. 5 mana, free 5 flyer. And it has bargain. When it enters the battlefield, if it was bargain, you drain 3. So opponent loses 3 life, you gain 3 life. Again, I think that this is like, 5 mana, free 5 flyer playable, but 5 mana, free 5 flyer that drains for 3, that's a great card. And it's in black, which will have much easier ways of activating the bargain. Because, for example, wicked rolls are very predominant in black, and wicked rolls are going to be, you actually gain some small benefit when you bargain it. So that's all fine. Also, there's food in black. That's also something that's easy to sacrifice. Phase. I don't know, there's some Fae tokens lying around or something like that. Or black also has rats that are you're quite happy bargain a rat. So that card looks really strong. And then we have Agatha's Champion. 5 mana for a 4/4 human knight with trample. So 4/4 trample for 5 mana, which is very meh. But with bargain, when it ETBs, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. And again, like 80% of the creatures are going to at common are going to lose a fight with Agatha's Champion. So if you can bargain it, it's probably removal on a stick that leaves a sizable body, which becomes like a super good card. But if you don't bargain it, it's very mediocre. So you want to play it in the deck where you will be able to bargain. Then we have the card with the mana discount, and here we finally have the first appearance of the. It's been talked about, but now we can actually see it. The Hamlet Glutton, 7 mana giant, 6/6 trample. When it ETBs, you gain 3 life, and it costs 2 less to cast if it's bargained. And here, I didn't do the numbers, and I probably should have done it, but 7 mana discounted to 5 is a big change, because when you have 2 lands, 2 turns later you have 4 lands in most games, in probably good 80%, 85% of the games. But when you have 5 mana, it's not going to be 2 turns on average that you're going to go up to 7 mana. It's probably going to be more like 3 turns. So the discount by 2 at this stage is not a discount of 2 turns, as some people might think. It's a massive discount. 5 turns on turn 5 is going to happen very frequently. 7 mana on turn 7 is going to happen very rarely. This is the sort of inflection point. That's why the 6 mana creatures are so hard to cast, because you don't always get the 6 mana in a game. So being able to discard it from the point when it's hard to get to the point when it's relatively easy to get is a super big game for that card, especially with a bunch of mana dorks and ramp cards in this format. I think that this initially in the first days is going to be one of the key cards to be winning. Also because there is not so much removal that can deal with the 6/6 in this format. So combination of being hard to remove, being big, gaining your life for a bit of stabilization is going to make Hamlet Glutton probably a very key card in the first days. I'm not going to say the Imperial Oath level, because it does not have that scry ability, but we're getting to that point, I think. I don't know how hard it's going to be to get those later in the set, later as the format progresses, but at least early days I would try to get as much from Hamlet Glutton as possible. And this is going to be also a big groan test when you play your deck and all of a sudden opponent drops Hamlet Glutton, gets this 3 life that basically puts you out of range, and then you're just like, oh god, how am I going to deal with this thing? I guess that this is probably where cursed rolls are going to be at best. Then we have a card like Back for Seconds. It's a 3 mana sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. If this spell was bargained, you may put one of those cards with mana value 4 or less into the battlefield instead of putting it into your hand. And this is basically like a 4-mana discount, because normally the problem with the spell like Back 4 Seconds is that you pick 2 cards up, but you didn't affect the board. So opponent can gain advantage from that and attack you while you did. Or you play this and you only can play a smaller creature of the 2 that you return to your hand. Well, if you go with Back to 4 Seconds, or maybe you even have to pick a smaller creature so that you are able to play something, and then the second one will be bigger, but then you play it next turn. Here you will be able to pick a 4-drop and a 5-drop and instantly put the 4-drop onto the battlefield. And I think that this is a big game for that card. It looks really strong. 4-mana discount is a lot. Like sacrificing a treasure to get 4 mana, because that's what basically bargaining this for this spell would be, is a big upgrade on what treasure can do. So yeah, I'm looking forward to playing this card. It looks like a good one-off, and because it is like it is, in some decks I probably would be quite happy playing 2 of those. And then we have like a Stone Splitter Bolt. That's a red and an X. It deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker. If this spell was bargained, it deals twice X damage to that permanent instead. It looks mediocre because the 1X spell that can only deal damage to creature or planeswalker or Ashiok, basically, is always behind. So, on turn 4, you won't kill their 4-drop. On turn 5, you won't kill their 5-drop, especially when it was a Hamlet Glutton. But bargaining it allows you to kill Glutton for 4 mana, which is okay, I guess, because they had to bargain something to play Glutton cheaper, and you will bargain something to play the Bolt cheaper. So it might be okay. And yeah, it is nice that it's an instant spell. We are used to that effect being on sorcery speed most of the time. Then there are the things that give extra spell effect. And here we have the white combat trick that I told you before. Archon's Glory, 1 white mana. So it costs 1 mana of white color. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. But if it was bargain, on top of that +2/+2, that creature gains flying and lifelink, which completely changes how the card works. 1 mana +2/+2, meh, okay. 1 mana +2/+2 flying and lifelink, that completely changes the maths. I think that this card is going to be really strong because, again, it is the only good aggressive white card that has bargain, and it's going to play well with so many things that white has to offer. In white you have the throwaway white enchantment that makes a 2/2 vigilant creature that will let you scry on top of everything. You can sacrifice that. The Princess Escapes the Tower saga, that thing, you really actively want to sacrifice it. And chapter 2 of that saga also gives another creature flying. So all of a sudden you can you have 2 2/2s on the board. You can give +2/+2 to one of them, then play Archon's Glory and sacrifice the Princess Saga to the other one, and all of a sudden you just swing for 8. Part of it has lifelink in opponent's face, and they never get back the creature that was exiled by the saga. So you're super ahead of it with that kind of thing. So I think that this card is going to be very important for white, as it unlocks a lot of that synergies. Procobrito, you need to sacrifice the saga before the trigger of the 3rd chapter goes on the stack. Yeah. This is part of my plan, is at least once in this format I want to have a bargain card in my hand earlier, but not sacrifice the saga, then go manual control, go through my draw step, and at the end of my draw, before I go to main when the saga triggers play the bargain spell at instant speed, just to annoy the opponent and make them think that I top deck the thing to sacrifice the saga, and make them tilt and lose the game because they will make mistakes after that. Am I a good person? I never promised I am, but I definitely want to do that. Anyway, moving back to the extra spell effects. Brave the Wilds, that's a very interesting card for the format for me as well. It's a green for search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So basically a tap land when you're playing heavy green. But if you bargain it, On top of the effect of getting Lay the Land, target land you control becomes permanently a 3/3 elemental creature with haste that is still a land. So early in the game, you're just going to use it, tap green, get whatever color you're missing, more green, fine, black, whatever. It allows you splashing quite easily. Later in the game, you do Lay of the Land, you sacrifice something that's lying around useless, and you also get a 3/3 as a deal. So sort of Rogue Elephant. Anyone remembers that card? Yeah, that is permanent. One of your lands, especially in the situation when you're flooded and you have so many lands, Brave the Lands. Even if you lose the one that became a 3/3, you still are getting another land from Brave the Wild, so you were not going to be behind on mana in that stage. So yeah, that cool card that, like, sometimes those Lay the Land effects are pretty bad later in the game, but this one stays somewhat relevant till the late game. And also, again, sometimes you will just do it because you want to sacrifice something. You want to bargain something away. And then we have Rowan's Grim Search, and that's 3 mana, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life spell. That's pretty standard for black. But if you bargained it, instead of just drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, and then you can put up to 2 of them back on top of your library. So that's you select from 4, but if you don't find anything in there, you can put 3 cards on the bottom of your library, just leave the one that you're interested. And if you're not interested in anything from that card, you put all 4, and you just hope that the top 2 after that are going to be good. So you have like up to 6 cards of looking through your library to find a solution, to find an answer to something that you need to deal with. And that's a big difference between just drawing 2 cards and then seeing through 4 cards and deciding whether you want 2 of those or not. Okay, then we have the just basic amplify spell effect. Candy Grapple, 2 mana, creature gets -3/-3. If you bargain it, -5/-5. So small upgrade. That can be quite relevant though, because it turns from killing like things that also cost 2/3 mana into something that kills something that costs 4/5 mana, which is great. Everything in Magic is kicker, FFF Lala. Farsight Ritual, that's you look at the top 4 cards of your library and put 2 of those cards in your hand and the rest at the bottom of your library. If you bargained it, instead of looking into 4 cards, you look at 8 cards. So like basically dig through time plus. And it's like, really digs deep in your library and you will be able to find something. But bargaining just doubles the effect of the spell, which, is something. But I guess that this card you will be frequently playing without the bargain and you'll be fine with that. And then Torch the Tower, which is interesting because it amplifies the effect but slightly modifies it. 1 mana to deal 2 to target creature or planeswalker. But if you bargain it, it deals 3 damage instead of 1. But you also scry 1. And that's a big upgrade because scrying is, again, 0.4 cards later in the game. And 3 damage kills 80% of the creatures, and 2 damage kills 50% of the creatures at the common. So you like hit additional 30 percentage points of creatures with it. And again, instant bargain speed triggers, which will be good with some things, especially that in red and white you won't have a lot, which will make playing with like Princess Saga, for example, problematic in playing red-white if you don't have like multiple copies of Torch the Tower. Yeah, of course. Dig Through Time had its advantages, obviously. Okay, now let's look at some bargain synergies. And I think that there are a couple of those. One is the use for idle cardboard. One is removing drawbacks. One is triggering death triggers, and that will be especially enchantment death triggers. And one that is like slightly iffy is fizzling opponents' adventures. Sometimes the adventure part is like destroy target enchantment. If you can bargain it away in response, you will fizzle the creature part. And sometimes it's like super worth it when opponent plays the 2 mana spell that destroys artifact or enchantment, and the creature part of that spell is a 6/7 basically hard to block gigantic brawler, and they have like plenty of mana. you'd rather bargain away the target for that and fizzle it and move the creature to the graveyard. So very often you're going to, well, not very often, sometimes you're going to basically bargain away something just to fizzle opponent's adventure spell. I'm talking about it in more detail because I'm not going to give you an example of that later in the presentation, because I'm going to talk about idle cardboard. And I think that the central card here is a perfect example of this idle cardboard. Hopeful Vigil. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance, and then it just sits there. You can sacrifice it for 3 mana and scry 2, but you can also bargain it for no mana, for probably gain of mana, and still scry 2. And your 2/2 is already there, so that's fine. That's like a perfect piece of cardboard to be bargained away. Not only you don't lose anything, but you actually gain the scry 2. I mean, there are some other synergies that you can maybe later get, and you will lose that opportunity. But it still seems like a very good way of bargaining something away. Then there is cardboard that will soon become dead. If you have instant speed bargain spells, if you have a saga and the chapter 3 triggers, with the third trigger on the stack, you can bargain away the saga and you still get the third chapter, so you're still happy. And you can get some benefit if you get an instant speed. So, for example, I can imagine Witch's Vanity is triggering the third chapter. As it does so, I'm playing the 3 mana spell that goes through my library and draws a card and bargain it. I don't lose anything because the Witch's Vanity was going to the graveyard anyway. And I get the sort of free bargain. And there are cards that are basically put in the set in order to enable bargain. And Hatching Plans is one example. It's a 1 and a blue enchantment. When it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw 3 cards. So it doesn't do anything when it's being played. It just sits there idly on the battlefield, and you're just dreaming of having something that will allow you to sacrifice it. I guess that this card is going to be great in some decks and terrible in some, and I think that you need to really make sure that you have enough ways of dealing with it. Okay. Then there is the removing of the drawback part. And here, like, the central example is the Cursed Courtier. That's a 3 mana 3/3 lifelinker, which is great. I mean, that's a great stat line for a card. But it has a problem that it comes into a battlefield with a cursed role token attached to it. And obviously you can put another role on it, and then this one drops off and it becomes a 4/4 lifelinker or something. But if you don't have the role things, well, you can always bargain away the cursed role, get some value out of it, and then it becomes a 3/3 lifelinker, which is great because you got rid of your own curse. You got the extra value, and you also boosted the creature like that. So again, this card is going to be great if you can put multiple rolls on it in different ways, or if you have a lot of bargain that will let you bargain away the cursed roll. Then we talked about Princess Takes Flight, and there is another saga that has exactly the same. We're used to the fact that sagas have the third chapter is like the thing that you're waiting for. But in this case, the third chapter is just a drawback. It basically, chapter 1 exiles up to 1 target creature, chapter 2 whatever, and chapter 3 returns the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So the whole point of playing with this card is not to let the third chapter resolve. So at chapter 2, most likely, you want to bargain it away. You want to sacrifice it to something. Perfect piece of cardboard to bargain away, and that you actively want to bargain away. And there is, I give it as an example, but there is Necropotence. I always call it Necropotence, but it's maybe Necropotence. Black enchantment, skip your draw step. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard, and pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. The problem with that card is that, of course, you would draw a lot of cards, but at some stage it might become problematic with Necropotence. You want to start drawing your cards again if your life goes down. well, you can just bargain it away if you have the right deck for it. And you drew like 5 cards from Necropotence and lost 5 life. You said, okay, 5 extra cards for 3 mana is just enough for me. I just bargain it away and move on with my life. Could Necro actually be broken and limited like it is in Constructed? I think it can be pretty strong, but it will require a really, really special deck to have a BBB in its mana cost. I tweeted today that what I want to do in this format is I want to have Rowan and Necropotence on board at some stage, and just like have a full hand because I Necropotence last turn, and then just like draw 4 extra cards, tap Rowan, everything in my hand is 4 mana cheaper. I cast my whole hand for like 4 mana, draw more cards and whatnot. I'm very much hoping that this will happen, even though it does require 2 mythics to play together, and a very, very weird deck. And then we have the death triggers. Obviously, I talked about some of the cards earlier when I talked about white-black enchantments die kind of sub-theme. And we have other examples here. The Warehouse Tabby I mentioned. Whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 black rat. Wicked Visitor is a 2-drop. That's basically a vanilla 2/2. But whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. This card it's like, I think it's going to be interesting in one way, that it probably is going to be really bad in every deck except for white-black, which means that if you're white-black, you should be access to at least a couple of those. And you still need to play 2-drops, so you will play that 2-drops. And if your deck is designed to sacrifice those enchantments you control, if it triggers twice in a game, that's basically like a 2/2 with haste sort of creature, which is a good rate. So I think that this card is going to be like filler playable in the white-black decks, and you should be able to get it anytime you want, because who else is going to want to play that kind of a card? So that's why I'm drawing attention to it. I mean, it's not a B, whatever. It's like a C- D+ card. But in this particular deck, in some of the builds, it might be actually good, and you might be able to get it very easily. And Savior of the Sleeping, the 3 mana 2/3 vigilance that grows whenever enchantment you control is put into a graveyard, which I think is going to be an actively good card in that archetype, because it will very quickly become a 3/4/5 that is a real threat. Because don't forget that if you're playing the kind of a deck that wants to sacrifice enchantments, you're also going to be playing rolls. So even if you cannot trigger the death trigger, you can always put like a +1/+1 roll on the Savior of the Sleeping, and then it still is a 3/4 vigilance creature, which is still a problem to deal for the opponent. And even if you put another roll on it, it will grow, unlike other creatures that you put rolls. And some rolls come at an instant speed. Very good. Okay, I think that this is like the end of the synergy part of the seminar. I'm just going to have a very quick venture into build rounds, because I think it's nice at least to think what is possible with those build rounds. I'm not saying that they're going to be good. I just want to look at possibilities of what's there. So Wilds look like a set of the micro synergies rather than macro, in my opinion. There's not like ham-fisted approach on synergies of the decks. I think it's more looking into, I have a pocket of like enchantment things here. I have a bit of bargaining that sort of links with that. And you're going to build it for modules rather than building like one cohesive, like cycling deck in Ikoria was like macro synergy. It was like everything is cycling in my deck, and I have those cycling synergies, and everything is going to work towards that. But this is going to be more like, I have a bit of like graveyard theme here with a couple of cards that can dig. Here I have a bit of like a sacrificing thing. Here I generate some rats, and I'm building like this conglomerate of those things, and they will be like playing together with each other. Because of that, I would expect it to have 1 in 50 draft decks quite frequently. And by that, I mean, you're not going to draft the same deck over and over and over and over and over again. They are going to be slightly more distinct, and you are going to have like different builds of white-black and different builds of blue-green and different builds of blue-black. you're going to have those like aggressive fairies and maybe control fairies and stuff like that. And they will be very much dependent on what uncommons are you going to open, which rares are you going to open, and stuff like that. So it's important to look for potential synergy clusters during the draft. And also, those synergies are quite amplified by the extra sheet. And no, passive aggressive fairies. No, that's too much. Extra sheet adds to the mix. And if you don't know the extra sheet, there is a number that I don't remember off the top of my head of additional enchantments tagged along in the set. And lots of those cards are just garbage. Like, Rest in Peace, no one plays that card in Limited. It's printed for the constructed players for some reason because they couldn't print it in some Commander additional set. They have to be put in the standard set. I don't know why. I think, side note, soapbox, I really think that those extra sheets are a great idea, but just don't use them to print Commander cards if there's like billion Commander sets already present. At least make sure that those cards are relevant for drafting and they add some extra depth to the draft. I don't need like an additional sheet with like 17 Fs that I will never play, that are just important for the for the constructed players, because there is so much product being released in Magic that there's absolutely no need to put constructed only cards on the special sheet in the standard set. Anyway, end of soapbox. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't start the sweet build around suggestions with Griffin Airy. I think that this card, I loved it when it was first released, and was it M20 or M21? Even though it was really bad in that set because the black-white deck was just not working, and lots of the cards in that deck weirdly didn't gain free life, and because of that, you could never trigger Griffin Airy. I made this deck work once, and it was in white-green when I had Griffin Airy and a bunch of Truffle Snouts. Truffle Snouts is a free mana 2/2 that can ETB with a +1/+1 counter, or without the counter but gains 4 life. And I had like a bunch of Aries and 5 Truffle Snouts, and I was making Griffins, and it was fun. Here, well, there is food, there is lifelink, and there's some ETBs that gain you 3 life. So I'm hopeful that once in a while you will be able to come up with a Griffin Airy deck. Alex Canada is saying GB splash card, and I do agree. I do still think that it will be possible to play it in strict white-green. Maybe not in white-black, but who knows? Maybe yes. So cards that Griffin Airy can work well with. Cursed Courtier, first of all. It's a 3/3 lifelinker, and 3/3 lifelinker attacks. Even if it dies, it will leave a Griffin behind if you manage to get rid of that cursed roll, which hopefully you'll be able to. Hamlet Glutton, easy. It does enter the battlefield, gain 3 life. So on top of the 6/6 Trampler, which is already going to be hard to deal with Griffin Airy in play, it also will make a 2/2 Griffin. And Tough Cookie is a good example of something that can generate quite a lot of things, because it's 2 food things. So even if a Tough Cookie on its own will be swamped on the ground, you can sacrifice the food that it generates to gain 3 life, make 1 Griffin. Next turn, you can sacrifice Tough Cookie, make another Griffin, and sort of build your Air Force very easily. And there's a bunch of other cards, of course, but I gave those examples for you to think about in white-green. But I'm sure that there are plenty of black cards that also do it pretty well. The white combat trick that gives lifelink is also pretty interesting in that one. If you have the right deck, maybe even the 4 mana 2/3 flyer that gets +1/+0 and lifelink if you have Celebration is an interesting idea for that kind of deck. Who knows? But yeah, I definitely look forward to drafting Griffin Airy decks. There is what I also call the I Like Rats package. And that's like, there is a bunch of Rakdos cards in the additional enchantment slot that can be interesting with the rats. And like foremost is Goblin Bombardment. I think that In the right red black deck, Goblin Bombardment is basically an A. I can imagine like when you have like a board with like Tauntauns and maybe two other creatures, and you play Goblin Bombardment, opponent is just dead all of a sudden, and they don't even know it because you can just sacrifice two creatures, make two rats, sacrifice two rats, ping them for more, sacrifice Tauntauns, make another rat, sacrifice something, and like all of a sudden like they're gone. Um, More importantly, there are no sacrifice outlets in this set. There is like literally one card in this set that allows you to sacrifice a creature relatively cheaply. And that's the adventure creature. So steal and sack is impossible unless you get some of the cards from the enchantment slot. And Goblin Bombardment is one great example. Vampiric Rites is another one. It's a 1 mana enchantment, and you can sacrifice a creature, gain 1 life, and draw a card. And I think that this is a much weaker card than Goblin Bombardment, of course, and this is going to be something that you're only interested when you're like into that heavy sacrifice kind of package, and that will probably be Rakdos in general when you have the rats lying around, and very often it will be better to sacrifice a rat to draw a card than to attack with those rats. And then when you already are generating those millions of rats and sacrificing them for something, you have Grave Pact, which is a hard build around because you have to be heavily black, but I think the card is pretty powerful when you have disposable bodies. So Grave Pact can be interesting. Again, be very careful because it's not an easy card to cast, so you need to have a right deck for that. But it's an interesting one. And of course, in paper, just draft it because it's probably like worth 20 quid or something. And then Raid Bombardment, it's another card that can be good with rats. So basically like a 3 mana, whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, Raid Bombardment deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So, if you have the rats, you can just basically attack with them and ping opponent for like 4, and then they have to make block decisions based on that. Sacramental. I understand that people who draft boxes want to have access to the value of the set, but you can generate value in multiple ways. One way is the additional slot, but you can make like new cards that are worth something, and also you can put cards that have some value but also are playable in limited and not necessarily completely unplayable. I don't say that you need to put like banger after banger for limited, because that will also be boring and it would outshine the original set. But there are cards that are valuable and still playable in limited. It just requires maybe more thought into limited in the decision process of what to put in this extra slot. I'm not saying completely scrap valuable cards, but there are some dope enchantments that can be worth something and can be also good in limited. I'm pretty sure of that. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's just no good enchantments that are worth anything. Put the Fable of Kikijiki in there. That's still worth something and will be interesting in draft. And by interesting, I'm busted. Okay, so when I said about the I Like Rats package, the natural thing that it also offers is the sacrifice outlets that the set does not offer at all. But if you manage to get like a Goblin Bombardment and Vampiric Rites, and maybe you get the Rakdos adventure card that also allows you sacrificing, then you might start getting interested in the Twisted Fealty, the 3 mana threaten effect, that also creates a wicked roll attached to something. And there is a colorless threaten effect in Ariad's Tempting Apple, the 4 mana artifact. When it ATBs, you gain control of target creature until end of turn, and you can sacrifice it to gain 3 life, and also you can sacrifice it to make opponent lose 3 life. So like sort of poison food, basically. And then those cards will become useful. I think that because there are no sacrifice outlets in this set, if you don't control those things, if you didn't draft the sacrifice outlets, those 2 cards are absolutely useless for anyone. So you should be able to get them on the wheel even or something. And if you have like 3 sacrifice outlets in your deck, these cards can be really powerful, especially that opponent will also not be very much expecting this kind of thing to happen. So if you have the I Like Rats package in your deck in some way, you are also more interested in things like Twisted Fealty and Tempting Apple. Right. The next sweet build around I found, and I think can be really good in this set, is Season of Growth. That's the card from somewhere recent, even, because I played with it in Limited, and it was okay then. And there were some decks that I built with it that were super sweet. But I think that the fact that this format has role creation, and often that role creation is tagged onto a spell, it was core 20, I think. Yeah, you're right. Creates extra possibilities. So Season of Growth is a 2-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you scry 1. That's one thing. And whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. And we have a bunch of... So normally this card was mainly for combat tricks and fight spells. Because fight spell usually targets a creature you control. So here we have a fight spell, the Curse of the Werefox. 3 mana, create a monster role token attached to target creature you control. When you do that, creature fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So you will draw a card from that. But in this set, apart from the fight spells, also other color spells will target. So your creatures. So, for example, here we have a Cut In, and that's a 4-mana sorcery. It deals 4 damage to target creature, but you also create a young role hero role token attached to up to 1 target creature you control. So you target something, you will draw a card from Season of Growth, which means that there will be many more spells that will target something that you control. You will have also things like the Ferocious Werefox, the 4-mana 4/3 with an adventure that creates a role token attached to target creature you control. So all those things will become available that you normally don't have in a set. So I think that there will be decks, and quite a significant portion of green decks might be interested in playing Season of Growth as an additional sort of enchantress in your deck. So yeah. And yeah, also like the white-green aura will be using it. White-red can be using it in some instances. Probably green-white, no. In the green-white, in the green-blue, you probably want the thing that draws card when you cast things that cost 5 or more, if you are interested in that kind of effect. But if you also play a lot of creatures, that bunch of scries is going to add up over time. I think Sam Black once talked about this card and told that you basically at some stage you reduce your chance of drawing a land by half by scrying every turn, or every 2 out of every 3 turns you will scry, because you will scry the lands to the bottom. So you only will draw lands when you have 2 lands in a row, and that doesn't happen that frequently, blah, blah, blah. You can do the maths. Okay. And then there's my, I think, last sweet build around. And this is the card that, again, I'm not saying that you should draft it first pick it, although probably it's going to have some constructed uses. It's Agatha's Soul Cauldron. 2-mana artifact, legendary. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Weird, but okay. Creatures you control with a +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you can tap it to exile target creature from a graveyard, that includes yours. And when a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And I think that there are a couple of cards that will be very easy to get that this card synergizes very well with. And the number one card that I think about when I'm looking at it is Gingerbread. Because Gingerbread has 2 things. One, an activated ability that is very good on bigger creatures. Like Gingerbread's whole shtick is that it's small, and you can pay 1 to give it unblockability except for creatures with haste. But the second part of it is that Gingerbread very easily finds a way into a graveyard, which means that you can do like play a Gingerbread, get a couple of attacks in, whatever, play Agatha's Soul Cauldron, then play some bigger creature, sacrifice Gingerbread, exile it, put a counter on that bigger creature, and now the bigger creature is basically unblockable. So, yeah. So I think that Agatha's Cauldron and Gingerbread are best friends. And then there are other abilities, including Tough Cookie's ability. Uh, because if you're playing already the food and you have the cauldron, and all of a sudden, if you sacrifice the Tough Cookie, you are left with other foods. You put the +1/+1 counter on something else. This ability, instead of costing 3 mana, will all of a sudden cost 1 mana. So you can just basically, for 1 mana of any color, because remember, you don't need to pay green for that. You just pay any mana, because you can spend mana of any color for the activated abilities. You can just basically turn H1 mana to turn each of your foods into a 4/4. So if you have like a broad food synergy, Tough Cookie, and Agatha's Cauldron, and I think it's a neat synergy. And another thing that is maybe less interesting, but Toadstool Admirer, having that ability to put a +1/+1 counter from 4 mana into 2 mana is something I would be interested in. And also the Toasted Admirer individually as a creature can get a +1/+1 counter easily, so it will get all the abilities that are done with the Agatha Soul Cauldron. I think it did, no? Oh no, it didn't make it. Okay. Why did I think that it makes it cheaper? No, it's the other Agatha. Yeah, it's the other Agatha that makes it cheaper. Sorry for that. It doesn't make it cheaper, but it does give it to the it does give the abilities to your things. And I think that especially Agatha and Gingerbread is going to be not only cute but also quite efficient, and I think easy to get. You got me, Zach. You got me, Zach. But that's not the first nor the last time. Yeah, again, Gingerbread, Agatha's Cauldron. I think that this is a pretty decent combo. Okay, I promise that I'm going to talk about this card in the Sweet Builder rounds, and I indeed do. And that's Yenna, the Red Tooth Regent. It's a 2 green-white for a 4/4 legendary elf noble. And it has an ability to tap, choose target enchantment you control that doesn't have the same name as another permanent you control. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. If the token is an aura, untap Yenna and scry 2. Activate only as a sorcery. So apart from obvious roles, there is plenty of interesting targets to copy. And my particular thing is Cooped Up, because with Cooped Up, Yenna can become a machine gun that for 5 mana just kills things. Because you can only create a copy of something that you only have 1 of. So you cannot make the second copy. But Cooped Up, you can exile it. So you make a copy of Cooped Up, exile the creature under the copy. Next turn, you make another copy, exile the creature under the copy. Actually, if you have more mana, you can use it multiple times in one turn, because Yenna untaps. So yeah, Yenna does allow you to scry 2 for 2 mana forever if I control a role, because you can put the role on the same creature and it replaces itself and you scry whatever. But with Cooped Up, yeah, you basically can create a copy of Cooped Up, exile the creature under the copy, make another Cooped Up, exile the creature under the copy, and you always end up with one copy of Cooped Up. And you can do, of course, the easy things with rolls. As you say, you can scry 2, and you can ping for 1 with Brick and Roll, and yeah, I guess that's more or less it. What else you can do is you can occasionally make copies of sagas, because sagas will naturally die. So you make a copy of a saga, it comes on the first chapter. Before the copy expires, the first one will also expire. So you can make a copy of the copy, that one will expire, and you can loop the saga infinitely, and you can accrue all the value from it. So like Huntsman Redemption is a good example of the saga that is great. And then, of course, if you can sacrifice the enchantments, you can also recoup that ability twice. So with cards like Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, you can make a copy, generate another food, get extra mana. At some stage, you can sacrifice the copy for 7 mana and give your creatures +X/+X until end of turn. And at that moment, of course, you can make another copy of the Knights of Sweet Revenge, and then later you can sacrifice it again. I don't think that you have to go through many loops of that particular interaction, because opponent will be already very, very dead. But you can do that with Hopeful Vigil or with Hopeless Nightmare. You can make those things several times and accrue some value of it. Obviously, Hopeful Vigil better because it creates creatures. Hopeless Nightmare, you probably won't get a discard card, but it does make opponent lose 2 life, which is not nothing if you're in that situation. Obviously, Hopeless Nightmare is also black, so you need to be in a 3-color deck. I don't know if Modern Magic Limited has time for that, but I'm sure if it does, Sam Black is going to tell us about it. I think it's still a sweet build around, and you shouldn't be always playing limited in order to just maximize your win rate. This is something that you might draft once and in 5 matches make it happen once to the opponent's scoop and be happy about it. Is Yena the Tameshi of this set? Yes, I think it is. Also, it is still a 4/4 creature. You should be alive with that thing on the board for at least some time. It's going to be interesting to see how quick this format is, but I don't think it's going to be like insanely quick, because except for the Boros Celebration, which can probably have explosive starts, I think that you will be able to play decks that can sort of stall the board. And White Green is probably the prime example of that deck, because you also have the bloody 6/6 that gains you 3 life. That, maybe not always you'll be able to attack with it because you'll be on the back foot, and that will be keeping fort while Yena can start doing things. I don't think also that you need to do cooked out 7 times before you can win. Most of the time, just doing it twice is probably going to be enough to win the game. I don't think that you need to play 3 Huntsman Redemptions to win the game. Probably the second copy will be just good enough, but I'm just showing that the value capability is there. That was the last slide. So with that, thanks very much for the 17 Lands team, who are amazing and probably hard working on getting the Wilds of Eldraine online for the release tomorrow. So thoughts and prayers with them. Also, big thanks to Fake Jake Brown, who is an amazing human being and is helping me immensely with recording those things. Thanks to my sponsor, MTGA Zone, and thanks to the patrons, especially the new one patrons, which was Matthew and Ganivo, my first Polish patron. It's good to have support in my own country. Hopefully by the end of the week, I'm going to make a stream that shows the first data. And also I'm going to talk a bit about what to be careful about when you're looking at the early data, including the confidence intervals and stuff like that. So for the first time, I'm going to look at how much value do you need to put on those early win rates and stuff like that. And what are the pitfalls of looking at the early win rates? Might be interesting. I don't know if I'm going to make it on Thursday or on Saturday, because it will depend on how much data is available, honestly. I don't want to rush it on Thursday just to get the early hot takes when I can actually wait 2 days and have the more solid analysis on that. And thanks to the chat for being very helpful during the stream. I think you prolonged it easily by 45 minutes with your questions, so thanks for that. And I'll see you, well, this week probably. Till then.